Good evening, friends. Tonight we will travel back to the 15th century kingdom of Ayutthaya, which is present-day Thailand. We will throw you directly into the heart of a dense and humid jungle. To be honest, in that environment, you might not survive the first day. But tonight, not only will you survive, you will also come across good fortune. A fortune so good it's hard to believe, even a bit scary. So, before you get ready to relax, take a moment to like and subscribe to the video. Of course, that's assuming you genuinely like the content I create. Alright, now dim the lights, and maybe turn on the fan to listen to that gentle background sound. Let's slowly dive into tonight's journey together. You are just an ordinary villager, and today's work is like any other day. You gather some mushrooms and wild vegetables in the dense forest at the village's outskirts. The air sticky like syrup, clinging closely to your skin. The sunlight overhead is filtered through the massive canopy, creating countless moving spots of light, dancing upon the moist ferns, while unseen insects play a monotonous and hypnotic symphony in your ears. Occasionally, a long-armed gibbon's ethereal call rings out from a distance. As you step forward, placing one foot after the other on the rotten leaves or soil, you feel as if the soles of your shoes are almost being absorbed by this land. Everything seems no different from yesterday, the day before, or the day before that. But today, you have ventured deeper than usual in pursuit of a colorful beetle. When you come to your senses, the surroundings have become somewhat unfamiliar, which is common in the jungle. A little getting lost is not a big problem. You steady yourself and prepare to retrace your steps based on memory. Just then, you turn around a layer of banana trees taller than you, and ahead, a small clearing you don't recognize suddenly opens up. Strangely, there is no sound here. The buzzing of insects and the chirping of birds that lingered moments ago have completely vanished. The air seems to have solidified, even the wind holds its breath. And then you see it, standing in the center of the clearing, quietly curling up a layer of tender leaves. Geez. This is no ordinary Asian elephant. Its skin displays a peculiar pale hue, not a sickly white, but a grayish white with a soft pink undertone. Resembling a type of clay that has been washed by rain for 1,000 years, sunlight bathes it. It reflected a warm and sacred light, and you could even see its light-colored eyelashes and toenails that were as white and smooth as pearls. Your heart was instantly gripped by an invisible hand. Your breath stopped in your throat. You were not afraid, but rather overwhelmed by an indescribable shock mixed with awe and fear. You certainly know what this is. Everyone who grew up in the Ayutthaya Kingdom has heard the story of Queen Maya's dream of the six-tusked white elephant, which heralded the birth of the Buddha. The Kingta white elephant is a sacred embodiment, the ultimate symbol of the king's legitimate rule, and an auspicious sign, granted to the entire kingdom by heaven. It seemed to sense your presence, paused in stillness, and slowly turned its head. Those eyes were filled with more wisdom and tranquility than any animal or even any human you had ever seen. It gazed at you quietly, with neither hostility nor welcome, just a pure and equal stare. In that moment, you clearly realized one thing. Your life, that ordinary little life of foraging for mushrooms that belonged to you, was completely over. From the moment you see it, your identity is forever changed. You are no longer just someone from a village. Your new name will be the one who discovered the white elephant. Of course, at this moment, you cannot fully understand what this means. You instinctively feel that you have encountered a great miracle beyond comprehension, but is this miracle a blessing or a curse? Some historians still debate whether this discovery is pure luck or a carefully orchestrated political performance by certain kings to consolidate power. However, this question is meaningless to you. You only know that you must do something. Your mind is blank, and the only thought is to run. You turn around and stumble back into the jungle. The path that once felt familiar now becomes a maze filled with unknown dangers. Tree roots trip you, vines whip your face, but you feel no pain. You just run for your life, your lungs burning like a broken bellows, and your heart pounding in your chest as if it might burst out. You kept replaying that image in your mind, the light skin, the calm eyes. Finally, you stumbled out of the edge of the jungle and saw the familiar outline of the village. You used your last bit of strength. You rushed to the village entrance, hoarsely shouting at several villagers repairing fishing nets. "Village chief, quick, go find the village chief." You were brought before the village chief, an old man with graying hair and dark skin, his face etched with the marks of time. You were breathless as you poured out your experience. The village chief and several elders around him were initially skeptical. They had seen too many people babble nonsense from the heat of the jungle or the blazing sun. But as they looked at the unblinking terror on your face and the precise details you described, their doubt slowly turned to gravity. "Take us there," the village chief said, rising to his feet, his voice not loud but full of weight. Thus, you led the village chief and several of the most respected elders back to that silent clearing. When you parted the last layer of leaves, your heart was in your throat. You feared it was just an illusion, afraid it had already vanished, but it was still there, just as it was when you left, quiet and peaceful. The elders behind you gasped in a suppressed manner. The village chief stepped forward a few paces, his sharp gaze scrutinizing the statue. He did not get too close, just observing from a distance. According to the laws of the kingdom, all white elephants belong to the king himself. No mortal may touch or disturb them without permission. This is knowledge ingrained in everyone's bones. The village chief confirmed this. This is not an ordinary elephant, simply one with a lighter skin tone. It indeed matches the characteristics of the sacred white elephant from legend, which is associated with the Heak Changpu moth. In some places, there are even methods passed down for preliminary verification before the arrival of royal experts, such as a sugarcane test, where people lay out different types of sugarcane to see which one it chooses, as a form of divination for omens. Although this is more a folk belief, it sufficiently demonstrates the serious attitude people have towards this matter. The news spread through the village like wildfire, with everyone gathering at a distance, craning their necks and looking at you with a mix of excitement and fear as they gazed at the statue. You realized that your good fortune was no longer just your own. It had become like a contagious virus, instantly infecting the entire village. The village chief's face, lined with discontent, was more serious than ever at this moment. He knew that this was both an unparalleled honor and a tremendous risk. From this moment on, this small and unremarkable village will be placed under the spotlight of the entire kingdom. Royal officials will come, the army will arrive, and all the resources of the village may be consumed. Any minor mistake could bring disaster upon the entire village. Historians often discuss how much autonomy a remote village had in the face of such unexpected events during that era. Would they gain some tangible benefits from this fleeting glory? Or were they from the very beginning caught in passivity and panic, waiting for the complete takeover by the monarchy? Observing the village chief's furrowed brows, you feel that the latter possibility is greater. Your personal miracle has turned into a collective burden for the entire village. Before long, a royal messenger from the provincial governor arrived, and his presence announced that this matter had risen from a local curiosity to a significant national event. The messenger read the governor's orders that the entire village, yourself included, was now under the direct orders of the royal family. And everything that followed left you dizzy. Did you think someone would lead the elephant by a rope all the way to the capital? But you were wrong, completely wrong. Escorting a sacred white elephant to the capital, Ayutthaya, is an immensely grand and solemn task. It cannot be taken lightly, as it is part of a grand procession. First, a path must be cleared for him. It's not enough to simply remove some weeds, but rather a broad and smooth road must be prepared to ensure that the sacred embodiment takes each step steadily and comfortably. Temporary resting stations and canopies must be set up along the way to shield him from wind and rain. A large entourage composed of guards, officials, and various attendants quickly assembles. Your small village suddenly becomes overcrowded. In this chaotic yet orderly celebration, you are assigned an entirely new and irreplaceable role: be a chief caretaker of the elephant. Because the white elephant seems to trust only you, it appears most tranquil when you are near. Thus, you walk at the very heart of the procession, right beside it. Your task is to soothe it, personally feeding it the ripest bananas and sugarcane, speaking to it in a gentle voice. You instantly transform from an unknown individual into a respected figure within this grand procession. Officials will politely inquire about the elephant's condition while the guards clear a path for you. But you know deep down that this is a form of disguised imprisonment. You are firmly locked into this role, with a daily range of activity limited to just a few meters around the elephant. The journey is long and dull. The procession moves very slowly, almost like a traveling ceremony. Whenever it reaches a village or town, local officials and common people kneel by the roadside to welcome it. They are not looking at you, nor at those officials. They are worshiping this walking auspicious sign. You see people fervently collecting the soil the elephant walks on, even its droppings, believing it will bring good luck and protection. This deeply rooted belief among the people gives you a deeper understanding of the significance of this event. You observe this world from a completely new perspective. You are highly revered, yet you are not in control of yourself. This procession is itself a meticulously staged political drama. It showcases to the lords and people of all the provinces, along the way, the current king's unparalleled blessings and his close connection with the divine. You are not escorting an animal. You are starring in a moving, political propaganda play. And you slowly realize that the purpose of this journey may be the procession itself rather than the destination. Of course, the expenses supporting this grand performance are astounding. Are the costs of food, labor, and materials covered by the royal treasury, or are they forcibly imposed as a sort of religious tax on the villages along the way? Historians have long debated this question, as records in historical materials are often quite vague. But as you look at the kneeling villagers with their earnest yet slightly sorrowful expressions, you begin to sense the answer in your heart. After a long journey that seems endless, You finally see it, the capital, Ayutthaya. That sight takes your breath away in an instant. Countless golden pagodas and spires, known as praying and reliquary towers, shine brilliantly in the afternoon sun, resembling a forest made of gold and flames. On the canal, resembling a bejeweled net, various small boats come and go, constantly weaving through. The magnificent walls rise high, enclosing a universe that is completely different from your village. This is not a bustling city. This is the center of the world. Your team moves through the bustling city, steadily heading towards the Falvich Grand Palace. The architecture of the palace is even more awe-inspiring, with layers of roofs covered in glazed tiles and walls adorned with intricate carvings and gold leaf. In the courtyard, countless courtiers and servants dressed in splendid attire are already kneeling on the ground, and the entire palace is so quiet that the only sound is the wind rustling through the flags. You are led into the audience hall. The light here is a bit dim, but you can still be rendered speechless by the sight in front of you. The high dome, the massive shadowy columns, and a strange scent of spices fill the air. Following the instructions, you perform the most respectful act of kneeling, which is called prostration. Your whole body lies flat on the cold floor, your forehead touching the ground. You have been repeatedly warned never to look directly at the king's face. He is the God King. He is a god on earth, the wheel-turning sacred king. A mortal's gaze would desecrate his divinity. You can only catch a glimpse out of the corner of her eye, of the blurred figure sitting high on the nine-tiered sliding throne, wrapped in golden light and silk. It seems he is not a physical being, but rather a mass of radiant energy. The king spoke, and his voice became majestic and distant through the hall's excellent acoustics. He was not speaking in the everyday language you understand, but in a royal vocabulary specifically used for communicating with the royal family, of which you could hardly comprehend a single word. He was not speaking to you. He was making a proclamation to the entire court. He announced that the arrival of this white elephant was a confirmation from heaven of his legitimacy and a good omen for the kingdom's eternal prosperity. You, as the discoverer, are brought to the front and bow again. You feel like a tiny speck of dust swept into a vast and ancient ceremony that you cannot comprehend at all. You are merely a prop, a tool responsible for bringing gifts from the depths of the jungle to the throne. Wearing your simple village clothes, you feel out of place in this palace, filled with scattered silks and jewels. This stark visual contrast constantly reminds you of your status. According to the strict dress codes of the time, there were vast differences in what people of different classes could wear and use. You kneel there, and a thought suddenly crosses your mind. Does this supreme God King really hold absolute power? Or is he, as historians argue, largely influenced by those Brahmin priests and powerful noble families? After all, it is they who interpret auspicious signs and conduct the ceremonies. The significance of this white elephant is ultimately interpreted by them. But these thoughts are fleeting. You are soon overwhelmed by the immense pressure emanating from the palace itself. This place is not just a palace, it is a Khalsan psychological weapon. Its grand scale, complex layout, and strict rituals are all designed to strip visitors of their personal will, leaving you completely submissive in awe. By forcing you to kneel and preventing you from looking directly at it, the king continuously reinforces his divinity. You are offering him much more than just an elephant. You are presenting your entire self in a meticulously designed ritual. After the ritual concludes, the true reward arrives. A court minister unfurls a magnificent edict before you and begins to read it in a rhythmic tone. You find yourself lost in confusion. However, the envious and jealous gazes from those around you make it clear that your life is undergoing a dramatic transformation. First, you are granted a noble title, Isgai, perhaps Kun, Tasar, or Luan, Ji, allowing you to instantly cross the unbridgeable divide between commoners and the ruling class. Then, the king grants you a brand new name, personally chosen by him. This name signifies auspiciousness. It symbolizes your innermost voice. But you understand that it feels more like a brand imprinted on you. From this moment on, you are the king's person. Your past name, along with your past identity, has been completely erased. Then comes the material rewards. You are granted vast, fertile rice fields in such quantity that you could never have imagined before. According to the Sakdina system of the Ayutthaya Kingdom, a person's social status is directly linked to the amount of land they own. The king, by granting land, forcibly places you into the kingdom's complex social hierarchy. In addition, you receive a piece of land in the capital, several heavy boxes of ingots, and countless exquisite silks, and a dedicated team of servants to attend to you. This wealth feels like an unreal dream, leaving you dizzy. You have transformed from a starving villager into a wealthy person of great standing. But just as you revel in this immense joy, a subtle, unsettling undercurrent quietly emerges. The edict, or the minister's explanation, pointed out, either explicitly or implicitly, that bestowing all this wealth upon you was to ensure that you could properly and with dignity care for the sacred people. Your wealth has been firmly tied to your responsibilities from the very beginning. At this moment, the seeds of the difficult burden of the white elephant were quietly sown. You thought you had received a mountain of gold, but you did not realize that the king also handed you a bottomless pit that must be filled with this mountain of gold. Scholars often debate the nature of this wealth. Is the granted land truly your private property in the modern sense? Or is it more like a lifelong appointment, allowing you to manage this land on behalf of the royal family and reap its benefits? The concept of land ownership at that time was, compared to today, completely different. As you look at the mountain of rewards before you, a strange feeling slowly rises within you. The king's generosity seemed not merely an act of goodwill, but rather a more sophisticated means of control. These riches are not cash that you can just pack up and take away. They are lands that require management, titles that come with court obligations, and servants who may be watching you at all times. This windfall is, in fact, a conchu, golden chain that binds you firmly to the capital, to the court, and within the gaze of the God King. It renders you completely dependent on the God King's continued favor, to ensure that you fulfill your primary duties flawlessly, taking good care of his elephant. The wealth you receive is, in fact, the paupartash price of your lost freedom. The euphoria of overnight riches has barely faded when the first serious trial arrives. You must build a residence worthy of his sacred status for this white elephant you are responsible for. It is here that the seemingly endless wealth begins to reveal its burdensome side. You are told that you cannot just throw up a shelter. An architect from the court has been assigned to assist you. He politely presents you with a roll of blueprints, and you are taken aback at once. That is not a structure for an elephant. It is a small palace. The building on the blueprint features exquisite eaves, towering columns, and a pool specifically for bathing elephants. The architect introduces the required materials with an air of certainty. The columns should be made from the finest, intricately carved young wood, and the walls need several layers of expensive ruby red paint. The roof should be adorned with gold leaf, and inside, silk drapes from distant lands should hang. As you listen, your palms begin to sweat. Any one of these materials is enough to keep your entire village working for years, and now you are to use them to build a townhouse. You have become the project manager of this massive undertaking, and you must procure them yourself, or rather, procure them through your equally inexperienced steward. These rare materials require hiring the city's finest craftsmen and overseeing the entire construction process. You soon discover that managing a construction site is 10,000 times more complex than gathering mushrooms in the jungle. Craftsmen will argue over wages, suppliers will raise their prices, and you must ensure that every detail is exquisite and perfect. Because you are well aware that the entire court, including the God King himself, is watching you. Every penny you spend is a demonstration of your loyalty and capabilities to the royal family. Your heavy boxes of ingots are visibly diminishing at a rapid pace. Historically, the royal white elephants did indeed each have their own exclusive pavilions, usually built near the palace. Their living conditions were seen as a direct reflection of the Jaush, God King's piety, and the strength of the kingdom. These settings even included specially made mattresses of velvet or silk for the elephants, ensuring the sacred beasts did not have to lie on the cold ground. Furthermore, the orientation of the entire structure had to be precisely calculated by the court astrologers to face the most auspicious direction. Everything you are doing now is standard procedure, but the question is, where does the money come from? Historians have long debated how much of the costs for such projects are directly subsidized by the royal treasury, and how much is expected to be borne by the elephant's chief caretaker, that is, you. Historical records are unclear on this matter, which may mean that the specifics vary from person to person, depending on the God King's mood and his intentions for testing you. You watch the workers at the construction site drenched in sweat, and then you look at the rapidly depleting wealth in your account, a sense of absurdity arising within you. In name, you are the owner of this elephant, but in reality, you have become his first and highest servant. With his comfort and status controlling your actions, depleting your resources. You even feel that your future home may be far less luxurious than the palace you are building for him. At this moment, the master-servant relationship has quietly reversed. The residence is not yet fully completed, and another huge expenditure has come. You must equip the elephant with a large full-time service team, and you are responsible for all their salaries, food, and accommodation. You soon realize that this is not just a matter of needing a few grooms to clean the elephant's stables and feed him. By court standards, the entourage of a sacred white elephant is comparable to that of a high-ranking noble. First, you need a dedicated team of chefs whose job is to prepare 3 meals a day for the elephant. The food menu leaves you speechless, featuring top-grade sugarcane, the freshest tropical fruits, and special rice balls mixed with herbs and honey. It is said that before being fed to the elephant, this food must first be offered to the Buddha statue, undergoing a complete religious ritual. Sometimes, the food is served on large trays made of bronze or even pure silver. Then you need several of the most experienced incense masters who are responsible for the elephant's daily care and emotional soothing. You need a dedicated guard team to protect the God King's safety 24 hours a day. You need a veterinarian appointed by the court to regularly check its health. Of course, the consultation fees for these experts are also quite a significant expense. What seems most outrageous to you is that you also need to hire a small band. Every day at a fixed time, the musicians play soothing and elegant court music for the elephant, because theoretically, sacred music helps cultivate the statue's emotions, keeping it in a pleasant mood. You have now become a small human resources director, managing a team of dozens of people. You not only have to pay their exorbitant salaries, but also deal with the petty disputes among them. Even more exhausting is the lingering, unsettling feeling you have. Among these people, a significant portion is comprised of spies, sent by other, more powerful nobles in the court. They report to you, but at the same time, they report every one of your movements and every word you say to their true masters. This feeling is like living in a huge, transparent fishbowl. Your servants are not just your employees. They are an extension of the court surveillance network, the Kiekit Panopticon. Concept later proposed by philosophers is perfectly embodied here as a prison. You never know when you are being watched, so you must assume you're under constant surveillance. Any negligence in caring for the elephant can be exaggerated infinitely, becoming a weapon for your enemies to attack you. Wealth has not bought you privacy. Rather, it has completely shattered it. Historians have also had some discussions regarding the internal dynamics of this service team. Are they loyal to their direct superior, you? Or will their primary loyalty always be to the king or to those who place them by your side? The answer seems obvious. You are nominally their master, but in reality, you, like them, are playing your own role in this vast power structure with no control over your own fate. You are now a nouveau riche in the court, with a prominent title and a mansion under construction. You begin to receive invitations to various court banquets and ceremonies, but you quickly realize that fitting into this circle is much harder than finding your way in the jungle. The first time you wear that intricate and lavish noble attire, you feel like a puppet on strings, unsure where to place your hands and feet. You walk into the banquet hall, surrounded by well-dressed, elegant, hereditary nobles. They are the true elite of this country. Their families have held sway here for hundreds of years, while you, just months ago, were a dirt-covered country bumpkin. They will approach you with a perfectly urban smile, but that smile never reaches the depths of their eyes. They will congratulate you on your luck. However, the word luck, when spoken by them, always carries a hint of disdain, as if to remind you that everything you have is merely a stroke of luck. I've heard that the palace you built for the deity is even more magnificent than my house's main hall. A minister, holding a wine cup, remarked seemingly casually, and you can't tell whether it is a compliment or a subtle jab at your extravagance and lack of restraint. When you walk into a small group of nobles chatting, their conversation will abruptly pause, and they will politely nod at you before starting a new topic in a tone filled with foreign terms that you can't understand, one that is trivial and inconsequential. You are politely excluded, and in their eyes, you are just a fortunate upstart. During an important ceremony, you made a minor mistake by using a common word in an inappropriate context, and you were coldly corrected in public by a senior priest. The entire hall fell silent in an instant. Everyone's gaze is fixed on you, and your face instantly flushes red, wishing there were a crack in the ground to hide in. This is when you realize that here, social survival is a precarious adventure. The court of Ayutthaya is known for its fierce factionalism and intense struggles. Those powerful families vying for the king's favor and tangible benefits openly and covertly engage in all-out battles against one another. And you, as a newcomer with no foundation, yet directly linked to the king's fortune through an elephant, you naturally become an unstable factor in the eyes of various powers, a potential threat. The complexity of court etiquette is simply outrageous. How to walk, how to sit, how to speak, and even how to position your hands are strictly regulated according to the rank of the person you are facing. A single mistake can be seen as ignorance of the rules at best, or interpreted as disrespect, or even a sign of rebellion at worst. Historians often debate how much social mobility truly exists in a society like Ayutthaya. Is it really possible for a commoner to rise through some kind of adventure and integrate into the nobility? Or will they forever be labeled as outsiders, tolerated but never accepted? From your personal experience, the latter possibility seems more likely. You gradually realize that these so-called cultures and rituals are not just traditions, they are weapons, used by the vested interests in this circle to maintain their status. By creating a complex system of unwritten rules that outsiders find difficult to grasp, they can easily identify and isolate intruders like you. The crime you've committed is not your actions themselves, but rather your origins. This social game has been unfair from the very beginning, and yet you were forced to sit at the table. Finally, at a grand celebration, you encountered the moment that made you fully awake. To showcase his supreme merit, the king decided to hold a formal naming ceremony for the white elephant and give it a royal title. Residents from the entire capital flooded the streets, eager to witness this spectacle. You are wearing the most magnificent attire, leading the equally adorned white elephant, sparkling with treasures, slowly walking down the center of a crowd welcoming you, as if draped in silk, filled with fragrant jewels, with golden hoops on its ivory. You see the fervent enthusiasm sparkling in the eyes of the people lining the streets. They knelt before the elephant, chanting words of praise, but you, at the very center of the glory, felt an unprecedented sense of detachment. You led the elephant onto the hastily constructed platform where the king was already waiting. He didn't look at you. His eyes passed you and cast to the thousands of subjects below the stage, and then he began to speak, linking the appearance of the great white elephant to the kingdom's recent military victory and the bountiful harvest brought by this year's favorable weather. He explicitly and unequivocally used the elephant as living proof of his divine mandate. Look, he raised his arms. Heaven has bestowed this sacred offering upon us to proclaim that my rule is just and under divine protection. The crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. At that moment, as you watched the king skillfully manipulate the emotions of the people, you suddenly understood everything. This elephant, perhaps, was not inherently so sacred. He was sacred because the king declared him to be so. All its significance and power stem entirely from the king's authority. It is not the cause. It merely serves as proof of the result. You, like this elephant, are merely props. Two of the most crucial props on the king's grand political stage, used to showcase his legitimacy to the world. You are tasked with discovering the miracle, while the elephant fulfills the role of being the miracle. As for the king, he is the ultimate interpreter of the miracle, the director who reaps all political benefits from it. Historically, the Ayutthaya monarchs, especially during times of political instability or when they ascended the throne through unconventional means, were highly enthusiastic about extensively documenting various great auspicious signs in their official histories and proclamations, particularly in obtaining a great white elephant, which served as a crucial piece of political symbolism. The names bestowed upon great white elephants were often crafted to be as opulent as possible, lengthy and grandiose, typically referencing mythology, cosmology, and the king's personal achievements. For example, an elephant might be named something like the jewel of the great king's victory. You gaze upon the great white elephant, worshipped by the crowd. He simply stood there quietly, unaware of everything around him. You suddenly felt an overwhelming sadness, both for him and for yourself. You were both swept into a game you couldn't understand or control, becoming carriers of a massive symbol. Historians have long debated the monarchs of that era. Did they truly believe they had a divine right to possess sacred creatures? Or was it all merely cold and meticulously calculated political maneuvering? Did they genuinely believe in these omens, or were they simply exploiting their subjects' faith? Looking at the radiant king on the stage, you think the answer might be a bit of both. But for you, the more crucial realization is that the king needs the elephant to symbolize his legitimacy, and the elephant needs the king to grant it sacred status. Without the king's endorsement, it would just be an ordinary elephant with pale skin. This is a system of mutual reliance and symbiosis between power and symbols, and you, unfortunately, are the unluckiest intermediary within this system, the person who bore all the real burdens of trivial tasks, while the king seized all the glory and benefits. You think, as a pawn of the king, shouldering endless expenses and social pressures was already the worst outcome of this game of strategy. You're wrong again. This great white elephant, symbolizing peace, prosperity, and divine protection, ultimately became the catalyst for a war, possibly the greatest irony of your life. The atmosphere in the royal court began to shift subtly. At banquets, the whispers among the nobles were no longer about whose garden was more beautiful, but about the rising tensions at the borders. The neighboring powerful kingdom, historically often the Eastern dynasty of Burma, was becoming increasingly provocative. Their envoys arrived at Ayutthaya, presenting an arrogant and disrespectful demand. The news spread quickly, causing an uproar throughout the royal court. The king of that neighboring kingdom claimed he was more blessed than the king of Ayutthaya, referring to the Buddhist concept of paramam, perfections. Therefore, he demanded that the king of Ayutthaya offer the sacred great white elephant as a divine gift. Of course, it wasn't simply about wanting an elephant. It was a meticulously planned act of blatant humiliation. In an era when the concept of divine protection and spiritual authority was deeply ingrained, the number and quality of great white elephants symbolized whether a ruler's reign was just and served as a definitive political symbol of a nation's strength. To surrender a great white elephant was to admit moral deficiency and lack of power, willingly submitting to subjugation. Your king, the divine ruler, naturally could not agree to this. He verbally rejected the envoy, which was precisely what the opposing side had hoped for. They were waiting for this exact excuse. The shadow of war quickly enveloped the entire kingdom. The capital rapidly shifted from a city of indulgence to wartime readiness. Conscription orders were issued. Young men in the city were gathered together, drafted into the military, and supplies were requisitioned in large quantities for transport to the front lines. The atmosphere of nationwide celebration from a few months prior, brought on by the arrival of the great white elephant, had now been replaced by an oppressive sense of dread and fear. Walking through the streets, you could feel the stifling tension, like the ominous calm before a storm. But what suffocates you the most is the rumors. In the corners of the palace, in the tea houses of the streets, people are whispering, "This war started because of the great white elephant. It's that villager who found the elephant who brought disaster upon us." You discover that you've turned from someone who brought good fortune into someone who brought war. The weight of tens of thousands of lives suddenly feels as if it's all pressing down on your shoulders. That discovery in the jungle, that blessing that once made you rich overnight, has now, without a doubt, turned into the most vicious curse. In the 16th century, a war broke out between Siam and Burma, which was indeed later declared by historians, especially Western scholars, as the White Elephant War. At the time, the king of Ayutthaya, Mahachakraphat, possessed several great white elephants, which stirred great envy in the Burmese king, Tabin Shweti, and his successor, Bainong, who ultimately used it as an excuse to launch a large-scale invasion. Historians to this day fiercely debate the true causes of these wars. Was the great white elephant truly the trigger? Was it a holy war concerning religion and national dignity, or merely a pretext that sounded noble, a more respectable justification for war, while the essence of the war was still about seizing trade routes, land, and population? But for you at the time, such academic debates held no meaning. You only knew that quiet afternoon in the jungle, a simple personal discovery, had been transformed by the ferment of power and the clash between nations into an international conflict. A single symbol could possess such immense destructive power. You personally witnessed how a symbol could shift from a unifying force within to an explosive catalyst for external conflict. Time silently slipped away. Several years, perhaps a decade or more, had passed. Wars flared up and subsided intermittently. Life persisted in a state of chronic anxiety. You were no longer a newcomer at the royal court, but you never truly became one of them. You were merely a functional presence, a living monument. The initial excitement brought by this divine gift has long since faded away. It has been replaced by a long-lasting, bone-deep exhaustion. You are trapped. One day, someone from your old village somehow managed to find you. He might have been your childhood playmate, or perhaps a distant relative. He sat nervously in your opulent living room, not knowing where to place his hands. You ordered the finest refreshments to be served, but he merely sipped them awkwardly. There was now an unbridgeable chasm between you. He talked about matters from the village, whose water buffalo gave birth to a calf, how the rice harvest was this year, the village chief's granddaughter marrying a young man from the neighboring village. These were once aspects of life you knew intimately, but now they sounded like tales from another world. You realized you could no longer truly engage with these topics. Your life had been consumed by courtly matters, protocol, expenses, intrigue, these heavy burdens. After he left, you paced alone in the vast, opulent residence. This house, rather than feeling like a home, felt more like a beautifully crafted prison. Those priceless antiques and decorations meant nothing to you. The ever-deferential servants seemed to you more like watchful guards, and those endless courtly affairs were nothing less than a recurring nightmare for you. How long had it been since you last felt the soil beneath your feet while eating simple dumplings? How long since you last laughed freely without a care? Late at night, unable to sleep, you wandered back to the rural palace. The great white elephant had aged a little, yet remained calm as ever, leisurely chewing on its wild grass. You stood quietly across the railing, watching it. Suddenly, you wanted to ask, do you feel trapped too? Do you miss the days of roaming free in the jungle? You recalled the afternoon when you discovered it in the jungle. If you had chosen to turn around and run away, pretending you saw nothing, what would your life have been like? You would likely have spent your whole life in that small village, living a life of poverty but simplicity, marrying, raising children, and growing old thereafter. You would have experienced true joys and sorrows, had friends you could confide in, and possessed an identity of your own. All of this, was it worth it? What you gained was nominal wealth and status, but what you lost was freedom, genuine connections with your community, inner peace, and most importantly, yourself. You realized true poverty may not be the lack of material wealth, but rather the loss of autonomy and authenticity. Your story became a sorrowful parable about the true definition of wealth. Historians rarely uncover personal accounts of ordinary people from that era, but logically infer the immense psychological pressure of holding a high position in the royal court must have been inevitable. Burnout is a modern term, but that feeling surely existed throughout history. At the heart of Thai cultural concepts, there is a word called reverence, a mindset of not wanting to trouble others, not wanting to offend anyone, a mindset of extreme empathy and deference. In a strictly hierarchical royal court, this mindset becomes greatly magnified, making you constantly afraid of making mistakes and trapped in persistent anxiety about offending your superiors. The deeper philosophical question is, in the culture of Ayutthaya, is there a concept of personal happiness that is independent of social responsibility and class status? Or is it that individual identity has been entirely consumed by its role in the social hierarchy? Looking at the quiet great white elephant in its enclosure, you feel as though you are the answer itself. Just as you think life will continue like this, in a state of numbed tranquility forever, the thing you fear most happens. This great white elephant, the source of all your wealth, status, glory, and even your suffering, this symbol of the entire kingdom's prosperity, begins to fall ill. It all begins with a tiny detail. One morning, he refuses the carefully prepared breakfast made by the chef, something that had never happened before. He appeared listless, with a dimness in his eyes. This small change was like a current of electricity that pierced through your heart in an instant, leaving you with a wave of pure, icy fear. You immediately summoned the kingdom's finest healers and priests. They arrived and gathered around the elephant, their expressions heavy with concern. They examined his body, performed various exorcisms and blessing rituals, and fed him all sorts of bitter herbal pastes, murmuring incantations under their breath. But the more they worked, the deeper their frowns grew and the heavier your heart became. News quickly reached the palace. A few days later, the king himself personally came to your village. His arrival brought no comfort. Instead, it imposed tremendous, suffocating pressure. He stood there, silently gazing at the ailing great white elephant, his expression grim. You knelt behind him, not daring to breathe. You were fully aware that if the great white elephant died, the king's wrath would burn you completely to ashes. Your negligence would be regarded as an affront to the king, the gravest offense against the entire kingdom. News of the white elephant's illness spread through the capital like a plague, seen by all as an utterly terrifying omen. The health of one animal had now escalated into a matter of national security. People believed this was heaven warning the king that his state of grace might be diminishing. Your personal failure would be interpreted as a national catastrophe. In history, the death of a royal white elephant was considered an extraordinarily significant event. Its mourning and funeral rites equaled those of the highest-ranking royal members. The entire kingdom would hold an official period of mourning. In certain instances, all court officials must shave their heads and put on the white mourning attire to express their grief. Regarding the interpretation of such an omen, historians and anthropologists hold differing views. A sick great white elephant, is it seen as evidence of the king's blessed state of grace waning or a test of his divine favor? If the king could mobilize all the kingdom's medical and spiritual power and ultimately heal this sacred royal symbol, it could instead reaffirm his strength and divine protection. But you have no mind to ponder such things. You only know your entire world, everything you've built over the past decade, your status, your wealth, your seemingly glamorous life, are all tied to the fragile heartbeat of this aging creature. The kingdom is founded on a symbolic economy driven by signs and omens, and this system is far more fragile than anyone imagines. When cold, harsh physical realities, such as birth, aging, sickness, and death, arrive, the grand edifice built on abstract beliefs can collapse in an instant. It eventually died. On a sweltering afternoon, it quietly fell onto its silk-covered couch. The breathing grew increasingly faint, until finally, under your watchful gaze, it completely ceased. There was no struggle, nor were there any cries of sorrow. Everything was eerily calm. However, what followed was anything but peaceful. The king held an exceptionally grand yet sorrowful funeral for him. His body was wrapped in white cloth, escorted by hundreds of guards and monks, and cremated. As his guardian in life, you became the central figure of the funeral. You wore white mourning garments, your expression numb as you led the procession, feeling like a ghost. After the funeral concluded, you were summoned by the king. You thought death awaited you, or at least exile. But to your surprise, the king merely cast you a cold glance, said nothing, and dismissed you. You were not executed, but you were stripped of the core purpose of your existence. You were allowed to keep your noble title and a portion of your land, but you were completely marginalized. You no longer needed to attend court meetings, nor did anyone invite you to any banquets anymore. You became a living but outdated relic, a grim symbol of an old era. Overnight, you were thrust from the center of the power vortex to its farthest outskirts. The years that followed were long and hollow. You grew old, quietly living alone in the vast mansion in the capital. You watched as new elites rose, as new auspicious signs were discovered, and as the endless struggles in the court unfolded. All of this no longer concerned you. You held a noble title and owned a grand mansion, but the core sustaining it all had disappeared. Your life felt like a long and lavish empty dream. In Thai Buddhist concepts of karma, which is known as kama, there is a distinction between good and bad karma. The arrival of the great white elephant was seen as a manifestation of the immense good karma shared between you and the king, while its death was naturally interpreted as the depletion of that good karma. Your decline in status is, within this spiritual logic, a natural outcome. It is an inevitable result. It is said that the remains of a royal great white elephant after cremation, especially the skull and tusks, are collected and then enshrined in specially built stupas, much like the sacred relics of saints. As for the guardians who lose the great white elephants entrusted to their care, what ultimately becomes of them? Historians hold differing views on this matter. While execution for apparent negligence was entirely possible, most interpretations suggest they were often merely retired and marginalized, as their symbolic significance had expired. Punishing them would instead remind people of that ominous event. Their fates were more a matter of political calculation rather than simple reward or punishment. You survived, but you live more alone than anyone else. You have outlived your mission. Your entire purpose in adulthood revolved around another living being, and that being is now gone. You are no longer the guardian of the great white elephant. You have reverted to being an ordinary person, but you can never truly go back. You can no longer become the boy who once gathered mushrooms in the jungle. You are trapped in the chasm between two lives. You cannot belong to either side. Your personal story quietly reaches its conclusion, but you never expected. You would still have the chance to witness the finale of a greater tale, the fall of the Ayutthaya Kingdom itself. Time fast forwards to the year 1767 AD. You are now an elderly man in the twilight of your life, nearly forgotten by the world, but you are still alive, living long enough to witness the war of ultimate destruction. The Burmese army of the Konbaung dynasty, in an unprecedented scale, once again besieged this great capital. This time, Ayutthaya could not escape destruction. You did not witness the bloodshed on the battlefield firsthand, but you saw the impact of war on the city. As the siege dragged on, supplies within the city were depleted. Famine and plague spread. Every day you could see black smoke billowing from various parts of the city. Fires sparked by cannon fire hitting temples and residences. The air was filled with the smell of burning and the stench of despair. Finally, it was utterly destroyed. You hid in the dilapidated house, listening to the cries and sounds of slaughter coming from outside. The resplendent golden pagodas you saw during your first trip to the city in your youth were now being blackened one by one in the raging fires and collapsing. The grand palaces you once walked through have been completely looted, leaving nothing behind. This world you once yearned for yet were tormented by is now being utterly destroyed. The 417-year-old Ayutthaya dynasty has thus come to its end. Countless works of art, literary texts, and official records have been lost forever in this catastrophe. Through the cracks in the window, you see a group of Burmese soldiers, strutting proudly with a few surviving prestige elephants, walking down the ruined streets. These animals, once symbols of the kingdom's glory and spiritual authority, have now become the enemy's most prized spoils. This is the ultimate humiliation for a kingdom that has already fallen. Your story ends here, in the ruins of this once great city. Your personal fate, from the accidental discovery in the jungle to a meteoric rise, to bearing the heavy burden that came with that honor, ultimately fading away in solitude, seems like a reflection of the fate of the entire Ayutthaya Kingdom. This kingdom also once had its golden age, just as your discovery experienced its peak of national power, a period of unrivaled influence, just as your rise was once caused by its great strength and attracted endless internal and external conflicts. Just as the burden you bore ultimately culminated in a tragic, irreversible collapse. Historians still analyze the deeper causes of Ayutthaya's downfall, including internal political corruption and factional strife. Was it Myanmar's superior military might or the leadership's strategic missteps? Perhaps it was a combination of all these factors, but regardless of the cause, the kingdom's sacred symbols, including the great white elephant, along with the later Chakri dynasty of Bangkok, were widely seen as pivotal markers of this downfall. Your personal experience is like a fractal image in a miniature form, perfectly mirroring the civilization you belong to in its grand historical reflections. Interestingly, after this great destruction, the new dynasty founded by King Taksin made the search for a new great white elephant a crucial mission. They needed to prove to the people that divine protection had not abandoned the land's people, but rather, under a new, more virtuous monarchy, it had been reborn. History always repeats itself. Your story, the tale of a fallen villager and a great white elephant, seems to have faded into the ruins of Ayutthaya, buried in the dust of history. Yet oddly, it has survived in another form. You've entered into a completely unfamiliar language. In the centuries that followed, as more Westerners arrived in Siam, that is, Thailand, they heard stories about the sacred white elephants. They heard about these extraordinary creatures, how they were regarded by the king as treasures, how they required vast expenses to maintain, how they had their own palaces and servants. Then, a semi-true legend began to spread. It was said that ancient Siamese kings, if dissatisfied with the court official and wanting to quietly ruin him, would give him a great white elephant as a gift. The unfortunate official could not refuse the divine gift from the king, nor dare to neglect the sacred animal. He could only exhaust his wealth, to build a palace for the elephant, to hire servants, to buy expensive food, until ultimately this divine gift completely ruined him. This story perfectly captures the essence of what you've experienced in life. And so, a white elephant, this phrase in the English-speaking world, gradually evolved into a well-known idiom. It specifically refers to things that appear very valuable and magnificent, but in reality, have extraordinarily high maintenance costs, lack practical value, and may even turn into a massive burden. Nowadays, people might use white elephant to describe a stadium left completely unused after the Olympics, yet requiring enormous annual maintenance expenses. It's also used to describe a device with extremely complex functions, but absurdly high repair and maintenance costs, like precision machinery. It can also describe a gift that puts you in a dilemma. Accept it, and it comes with unwanted responsibilities and obligations. Refuse it, and you risk hurting the giver's feelings. Each time people use this term, they are, consciously or unconsciously, retelling your story. They may not know Ayutthaya, may not know the divine king, may not know the exquisite pavilion you personally built, even more splendid than your own home, nor the sleepless nights you endured worrying about how to pay the musicians' wages. But they understand the feeling of being burdened by an auspicious blessing and weighed down by wealth. Your experience became a metaphor for a universal human predicament. Regarding the precise origin of this saying, linguists and historians are still debating. The king's deliberate use of the great white elephant to punish his ministers Whether it is a true historical account or if it was embellished by Westerners to make the story more dramatic is still up for debate. We may never get a definitive answer. But in modern Thailand, the great white elephant is still regarded as a divine gift, as the property of the monarch, carefully tended to by the Royal Household Affairs Office. This tradition continues, though the context is now entirely different. And you, the one who got lost in the jungle while gathering mushrooms, your entire life, the journey filled with awe, fear, responsibility, honor, and regret, a complex journey, was ultimately distilled into a simple two-word metaphor. Your suffering became a story of great utility for future generations. This is the power of language, which can transform a specific cultural experience, bound to a particular time and place, into a universal concept that transcends time and space, resonating with countless people from different cultural backgrounds, allowing them to connect and empathize. And now, the story of this word has also come to an end. Are your eyelids growing heavy as well? You can almost feel the characters from the story, the king, the nobles, the priests, and even yourself, all slowly fading away, like ink gradually dissolving in water. The golden capital, that tranquil great white elephant, both are beginning to blur, merging into your own dreamscape. You are no longer the custodian of that story. You are merely a traveler listening quietly from afar. The journey's end is a warm and peaceful darkness, where the weight and clamor of history will dissolve into the lullaby as the faintest background sound. The story ends here. Good night.